Bluebeard, history's most chilling serial killer fairy tale. Long before the story became a fairy tale, it was a warning whispered from mother to daughter in the dying embers of candlelight. Bluebeard. Not a name. A sentence. The color of rot. The beard of a man who had seen too much blood to fear it anymore. And behind that name, buried under centuries of myth, lived the bones of something real, something monstrous, something that history tried to forget. They said he lived in a castle by the sea, where the waves crashed against the cliffs like the hands of the dead trying to climb back into the world. The castle was beautiful, towering, carved from salt-white stone with glass windows the size of banquet tables. It was the kind of place you dreamed of living in when you were poor and desperate. And that was the trick, because Bluebeard never married noble women. He married hunger. He married ambition. He married the kind of beauty that came with a price tag. No one knew exactly how many wives he had. Some said 5, others said 7, but the number didn't matter. What mattered was the pattern. Each woman arrived full of light. Each woman vanished without a word. And each time Bluebeard mourned so publicly, so extravagantly, that the world forgot to ask too many questions. He would walk the village streets in black robes, eyes swollen with false grief, handing out food to the poor and gold to the churches. He built wells. He rebuilt roofs. He made himself a legend of generosity. And in return, the people turned their eyes away from the black carriages that rode out of the castle gates under cover of night. But legends rot when they sit too long. The story of Bluebeard didn't stay a secret, because one day he took a wife who asked too many questions. She wasn't born to nobility. She was the daughter of a spice merchant, sharp-tongued, curious, and far too clever for the silks she wore. Bluebeard saw her at a market, offering her opinions like coins to anyone who would listen. He smiled, and 3 weeks later, they were married. The castle welcomed her like a mouth welcomes meat. Servants bowed, doors opened, jewels glittered, and Bluebeard, charming and warm, handed her a ring of keys. "You may go anywhere," he said, kissing her forehead. "Every door is yours, except one." It was a door at the end of the west wing, a small thing, plain wood, no gold, no carving. Just a key with a strange black rust on it. He told her it was a wine cellar, that it was dangerous, that it was forbidden, and for a time she obeyed. But curiosity is a thing with teeth. The castle grew cold in the evenings. Bluebeard traveled often, and the new wife, we'll call her Isabeau, found herself wandering hallways at night, listening to the moan of the wind through the stone, to the rustle of whispers that had no mouths. The servants would not go near the west wing. When she asked why, they shivered and prayed. So one night, when Bluebeard was gone and the moon was high, Isabeau took the black key and turned the lock. The door groaned open. The smell hit first, not rot, not blood, something worse. Oldness, a silence too deep, a room that had not forgotten. Inside were the bodies, not buried, not burned, displayed. 7 women, hung from hooks, dressed in their wedding gowns, lace browned with age, skin drawn tight over yellowing bones. Their eyes had been sewn open, their mouths stitched shut. Each one stared directly at the door. Isabeau did not scream. She could not. The silence in the room was too thick, too sacred. She backed out slowly, locked the door, and ran. The next day, Bluebeard returned. He knew. The black rust on the key was not rust. It was blood, enchanted, impossible to clean. A test. "You disobeyed," he said, his voice the calm of a blade before the cut. She begged. She wept. She tried to explain, but Bluebeard did not punish her that night. He simply locked the doors to the castle, called for no food, lit no fires. 3 days, he said, to pray. Isabeau knew what that meant. She wrote letters and threw them from the tower. She screamed into the wind, and finally she remembered. Her sister, a hunter, a warrior, a woman who did not believe in fairy tales. On the third morning, Bluebeard came with the noose. But as he opened the door to the chamber, he found Isabeau standing, not alone, but with her sister. And her sister had come armed. What happened next was never written down clearly. Some say the sister stabbed Bluebeard through the eye. Others say he fled and threw himself from the cliffs. But the castle stood silent the next day, and Bluebeard was never seen again. The bodies were buried, the room was sealed, and the castle, for a time, stood empty. But death leaves stains, and the story of Bluebeard would not die with him. Because what if he wasn't just a story? What if he had a name? What if he had many? The tale of Bluebeard has floated through time like a ghost with no grave. Every century adds a new wrinkle. Every retelling adds new blood. But dig beneath the silk and bone, and what you find isn't fantasy. It's something worse. It's real men with real names and real victims, whose crimes were so monstrous they had to be retold as fiction, not to entertain, but to survive. Let us begin in 15th century France with a name that history still speaks with a shiver: Gilles de Rais. He was a knight, a soldier, a companion of Joan of Arc, rich beyond comprehension, a war hero draped in medals and blood. But when the wars ended and glory faded, something inside Gilles curdled. His castles became fortresses of solitude. His servants whispered of screams behind stone walls. And soon, the disappearances began. Children, mostly. Boys, vanishing from villages near his estates. Hundreds over the years. No one dared accuse him. He was a baron, a war saint. But behind his blue velvet robes and jeweled swords, Gilles de Rais was building something darker than any battlefield. A theater of death. He would lure the boys in with promises of food or employment, dress them in fine clothes, and then he would torture them, not in rage, but in ritual. His servants later testified in court, their voices cracking with horror. Gilles kept ledgers, detailed notes, descriptions. He wasn't killing to silence, he was killing to remember. It took years for justice to catch up. Only when his political enemies gained enough power did the mask fall. He was arrested, tried, and found guilty of killing more than 100 children. Some historians say the real number was far higher. He was hanged and burned in 1440, but even in death his story would not fade, because it was retold. Not in textbooks, but in fairy tales. Gilles de Rais became the whisper of Bluebeard, but he wasn't the only one. Fast forward 2 centuries. Germany. The name, Peter Stump. He was called the Werewolf of Bedburg, a farmer, a father, a man who, by day, blended in with the living. But at night, he became something else. Accused of murdering and cannibalizing at least 14 people, many of them women and children, Stump claimed he had made a pact with the devil, that a magical belt had turned him into a wolf. His trial was a spectacle of horror. They tore his flesh with hot pincers, broke his limbs, then beheaded and burned him. But not before his crimes became part of the tapestry of European folklore. His story bled into the idea of the beast husband, the charming man who becomes a monster behind closed doors. Sound familiar? And still, there were more. Elizabeth Bathory, the Blood Countess of Hungary. Though not a Bluebeard by name, she was his mirror, a noblewoman who allegedly tortured and killed hundreds of young girls. Some say she bathed in their blood to preserve her youth. She was never tried in open court. Her status was too high, but she was walled into her own castle, bricks sealing her in like the secrets she buried. Her story became tangled with vampires, with witches, with the idea that nobility could be monstrous and untouchable. Each of these figures added a thread to the Bluebeard tapestry, and together they formed a truth that fairy tales tried to make safe. The most dangerous monsters don't hide in the woods. They sit at dinner tables. They wear rings. They smile. By the 17th century, Charles Perrault wrote the version of Bluebeard we know best. He softened it, made it moral, gave it a happy ending. But the bones were still there. The forbidden door, the dead wives, the curious heroine. It was a story told to warn girls. Beware the wealthy man who wants your silence. But what if that story wasn't just a metaphor? What if it was a pattern? From Gilles to Stump to Bathory, the story keeps repeating. Power corrupts, and privacy protects evil. The castle, the mansion, the estate, they're all the same stage. And behind the door, the truth. The question is not whether Bluebeard existed, it's how many times he has. History remembers monsters, but it rarely remembers their hunters. For every man like Bluebeard, there were women who refused to vanish behind closed doors. Women who bled and burned and still rose, dragging truth into daylight with bare hands. These aren't fairy tale princesses. These are survivors, fighters, names too long ignored. Isabeau, the merchant's daughter, may be myth, but she stands for many. For the women who faced forbidden doors and opened them anyway. For those who saw the horror and lived to speak it. Take Marguerite de la Roque, a noblewoman cast away in the 16th century. Her crime? Falling in love? Her punishment? Marooned on an island near Quebec by her own family. Left to die. But she didn't. She survived off moss, snow, and stubborn rage. She buried her lover and their child with her own hands, and when she was finally rescued, she didn't retreat into silence. She told her story. Loudly. Publicly. She became legend. Then there was Ertzi, a chambermaid in Hungary in the house of Elizabeth Bathory. When the other girls began disappearing, Ertzi did what no one else dared. She spoke. She ran. She found help. And when the Countess was arrested, it was Ertzi's testimony that cracked the stone open. She risked everything, and she was believed. In England in 1613, a woman named Anne Askew refused to recant her beliefs during the Protestant Reformation. She was tortured, stretched on the rack until her joints shattered. And when they carried her, broken and burning, to the stake, she preached. They tried to silence her. Instead, she became fire. Even in the 19th century, when serial killers hid behind the myths of civility, women fought back. Mary Ann Cotton, H. Holmes, these monsters were brought down because someone refused to stay quiet. Mothers, nurses, sisters, journalists, they asked questions, and they didn't stop. The story of Bluebeard has always depended on silence, the castle, the forbidden room, the hidden truth. But the real story is about the ones who refused that silence, who bled their voices into history. In some versions of the fairy tale, the wife is saved by her brothers, but in others, the older, darker ones, she saves herself, or her sister saves her, or a group of village women storm the castle. And maybe those aren't just creative endings. Maybe they're echoes of things that really happened. Women who knew something was wrong, women who risked being called liars, women who refused to die quietly. They aren't side characters. They are the story. And the more we tell it, the more monsters begin to fear the door opening. We don't tell the story of Bluebeard because it's beautiful. We tell it because it's true. Not in the literal sense, not in the way fairy tales often are sanitized and sold, but in the emotional bones of it, in the warning baked into its breath. Because every time a child is told not to open a door, there is a question hidden inside it. What are we really afraid of? Is it the monster or the truth? Bluebeard endures not because he is unique, but because he is universal. Because behind every century's silk curtain, there is a man with too much power and too many secrets. And because every generation, a new woman finds the key in her hand and must decide whether to use it. We tell the story to remember the victims, not just the women in the tale, but the women outside it. the ones we failed, the ones we silenced, the ones who opened the door and were punished for it. We tell it because every time we speak it aloud, we shift the balance. We say, "We see you, we name you, we will not forget you." But we also tell it to remind ourselves of what power looks like when it goes unchecked, when charm disguises cruelty, when privacy becomes a cage. Bluebeard is not a creature of the past. He is an ecosystem. And storytelling is the wildfire that makes him retreat. And most of all, we tell it because the tale has changed. In this century, the wife doesn't wait for rescue. She rescues herself, she breaks the lock, she frees the others, she burns the room. She doesn't become the next Bluebeard. She dismantles the system that created him. And she lives. That is the power of telling. That is the power of refusing to forget. Because when we remember the fairy tale, we remember that monsters are real. But so are the ones who survive them. So if you ever find a locked door and a key that hums in your hand, turn it, open it, speak. Because somewhere, someone else is listening. And they're waiting for you to tell the tale.